Hello, Greg.
Hello, Hugh. It's
This is
another blue moon and a super moon tonight. Can you believe it? That's like the second one this year, isn't it?
this is the biggest moon.
This is even bigger than the last super moon.
Yeah, it's going to be the biggest moon for 14 years. It's in Aquarius, headed to Pisces. I don't like Pisces.
Everything you say will count double tonight because of the super moon.
Yeah, my Pisces brother. I don't know how to say it. Um, he raped my wife in front of our children, and he was a Pisces, so I don't like Pisces people. Come to think of it, Greg, every person in my life has stabbed me in the back as they told me they were my friends and family.
Yeah.
I don't have any friends. I don't have any family that hasn't stolen from me. To give you, for instance, my very first friend in life, all his friends on his Facebook page are part of the people that covered up my wife's murder in Tennessee. And he told me he went back to Tennessee, which was a lie.
Right.
He was living in Michigan, but he lied to me and told me he was in Tennessee. And that's why I went to Tennessee, was to look him up when two of my wives were murdered.
Yeah.
And that's the oldest friend in my life
Yeah, I know. I'm aware of it.
In Oakland County, Michigan. Uh, I'm,
Hmm.
I'm, I'm pretty sure that Osborn and Bowe are his friends, and he's used me all my life with his family. I'm pretty sure of that. So,
Yeah, it's pretty sad because, yeah, you really haven't had anybody really help you or anything all these
no, my
years.
whole life, nobody helped me. My
Yeah.
my own mother tried to murder me because she was mad at my father.
Now,
And
then you were what, 4 or 5 years old
no,
back
I
then?
was about two,
But that's right. That's right.
maybe
Yeah.
one. Um, I remember her changing my diaper, and then I remember being in front of the TV. She chopped up the family's piano, and then she told me I was next. And then I have no memories for a year and a half because she put me in a coma.
Hmm.
And then she lied to everybody and said my brother dropped me out of a wagon when I didn't die.
Right. And your dad was a drunk.
Yeah, my dad was an alcoholic out of World
Hmm.
War II.
Yeah.
Um, she never told him that I was kidnapped. Can you believe that? She never told my father I was kidnapped.
And that pretty much enabled him to keep doing it.
Well, he would have protected me.
Yeah.
My
Yeah,
mother,
that was his redeeming quality because even though he was a drunk, I mean, he was a fighter and he certainly wouldn't have put up with that. It was part of
he,
the depression of his World War II, I believe,
yeah.
from what he
And then
had to go through
the
there.
guy that was best man at my wedding, um, I called him and told him that hitmen were trying to kill me. He came over. He called the police and told the police I committed suicide when people were trying to kill me. And then he stole my blunderbuss that an Indian chief had given me.
Hmm.
Um, After keeping the blunderbuss for 250 years in his tribal tent, he knocked on my door one day and said, "Here, we killed your ancestor, and I decided it was time to give you back your ancestor's gun." The guy who was best man at my second wedding, he took the gun. Unbelievable.
I know that.
And he
Yeah, the
never gave it
historical
back.
significance
He
is
never gave it
unreal.
back, and I know he took it because I stopped by his house after I recovered from those people trying to murder me, and my gun was on his uh, table in his den
Hmm.
where his family ate. And I kept my mouth shut, and I just figured, well, he'll give it back to me one day, but he never did.
Hmm.
So everybody in my life who told me they were a friend, they stole my business, stole money from me, and literally stabbed me in the back. And tonight's video is going to be about my murdered wives once again, because nobody's ever gone to jail for them.
Right.
And when I moved to Tennessee with my third wife, Victoria, prior to Victoria getting there, I didn't bring Victoria with me. I wanted to find a house before I moved her there because she had muscular dystrophy. The Osborn family came down from Alaska with Senator Cotton's family. Senator Cotton's family married into the Osborn family, the governor's family from Michigan, who kidnapped me and murdered my twin. And those people were the Oakland County child killers. The people,
Cotton and Osborne.
yeah, Darrell Hall, Osborn, Anderson, Andrews. And the Cotton family with the Osborn family, they stole my Kennedy letters right out of my trailer.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me. And out of my house.
Is that why you were staying at Kinzer Park in
And then,
Tennessee?
Adrian Osborn and I moved to Tennessee to get away from the people of Michigan because everybody, my own brother raped my wife in front of our children.
Mm-hmm.
And then everybody left me to fend for myself after my first wife, Nancy, stabbed me in the back with a butcher knife. At that time, they stole my business from me, Bottom Line, and I was Bottom Line Publishing in New York at the time. And I was working to publish the band that I created as they stole it from me with a guy named Westfall. And then Westfall was dead in a week. He crashed in his plane or something. And they asked me back. And me, in all stupidity, I went back. I should have just formed a new band. And all my relatives and brothers and sisters and my own mother and father, they helped my two best friends steal my band out from under me after my wife stabbed me in the back with a butcher knife and pushed me down 2 flights of stairs. And that was my first wife, Nancy, and she was a schizophrenic.
Mm-hmm.
I moved to Tennessee, and the Osborn family came down from Alaska with Senator Cotton's family. And Andrea Metcalf, and they told me they owned a ministry up in Alaska, a Baptist ministry. It was called the Divine Time Ministry in Alaska. And Andrea Metcalf, she kept trying to have sex with me, and she was married to a guy in Tennessee named Metcalf. And I always refused her because the guy she was married to, his little brother was a friend of mine, and I kind of liked him. And he's what you call a holler in Tennessee. They speak a little bit different, and they live on sides of mountains, and they holler across. And he owned the water slide in Kinzer Park, where I was staying in my trailer until I got a job in a house to move Vicky there. And Andrea, who owned this ministry and wrote songs about God, she kept trying to have sex with me behind her husband's back. I never did because of Robbie Metcalf being my friend, and his older brother was married to Andrea Osborn. Mm-hmm. Senator Cotton's family, Jane Cotton, was married to Adrian Osborn, and it's just weird that these people, they kidnapped me in Michigan, and then I moved away from Michigan, and then they attacked me in Tennessee, the same Osborn family all over again. Instead of kidnapping me there, a woman in the Osborn family kept trying to have sex with me while she was married, and I wouldn't let her.
Mm-hmm.
So I've never had any real friends in my life. Victoria was murdered in Johnson City, Tennessee, after she was murdered at our ranch, a ranch I bought from Mr. Manning of Carolina, Senator Graham State. And Senator Graham State hid my kidnap and the murder of my twin with Patterson in Oakland County, Michigan, and the Barr family and Kathy O'Brien. They've hidden my entire life for 70 years as they murdered kids all around me. And that's Senator Graham. So all these senators, Cotton, Senator Coons, in a minute I'll talk about Senator Coons, and Senator Graham. I stopped an illegal CIA gun and drug trade being run by the Senate in Utica, Michigan, on property I bought from Donald Trump's tax attorney, Mazar. And Victoria was murdered on the Civil War ranch after the Renegades built a biker club at the end of our street. Then she was murdered.
Mm-hmm.
And they kept running a shovel around my brick home. And I'd call the police, and the police would come out, and they used fake names and badge numbers because all the police there in Greenville were selling the same drugs I stopped in Michigan, in Utica, Michigan. Mm-hmm. And about 12 to 15 police officers in Greenville, Tennessee, where my homes were at, went to jail for dealing drugs. And all of them, every time I called, they would use fake names and badge numbers. So there's no way of telling which of the 15 cops in Greenville were helping to murder my wife, Victoria. But I found her dead on our farm about 3:00 in the morning one night after they'd been running a shovel around her bedroom for a couple of weeks, after building a renegade and an outlaw bike clubhouse at the end of our street. And we lived out in the middle of nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
When I found her dead, I gave her CPR, revived her, and took her to a hospital. And then over a 35-day period, they dismembered and raped her, and they slit her throat Halloween Eve right in the hospital. And can you hear that alarm going off?
I don't hear any alarm, no.
Okay, good. When Victoria was murdered, they murdered my attorney at the same time. And prior to Victoria being murdered, the Walters family had asked me to burn their properties down. And they told me they were going to give me $10,000 every time I burned one of their homes or businesses down. And I told them, no, I'm not an arsonist. And they had rented me my second house in Greenville, Tennessee, next door to Alex Jones, who owned the Greenville Sun, the Walters family.
Mm-hmm.
And I told the Anderson family that Walters, after Terry's murder, I told the Anderson, who was my neighbor, that Walters had asked me to burn his properties down. And he confronted the Walters family, mm-hmm. and then he and his wife were murdered. They didn't live more than 2 weeks after I told them about Bobby Walters asking me to burn his properties down. And then when my wife was in the hospital in Johnson City, the Walters family, a woman named Walters, was my wife's advocate. And as they cut my wife's ears off in Johnson City and took her ears, and for no reason, there was nothing wrong with her ears. They screamed over the phone in her advocate's phone in her hospital room, slatery. And slatery was what do you call it? The attorney general in Tennessee at the time. So they
Yeah.
cut her ears off, took her ears, and screamed over the advocate phone's Miss Walters' phone, slatery, before they slit her throat Halloween Day. And they had put pillows all around her head in the hospital bed so I wouldn't notice her ears were gone. And a few days after they took her ears, I was talking to her, and I took the pillows away from her head so I could hear her better, and her ears were gone. And I asked the doctor, why are her ears gone? And I said, what did this? And he told me pressure. And I said, well, yeah, I know pressure did it, but where are her ears? Because there was no reason for her ears to be missing.
Wow.
And then black people kept showing up at my house, Jehovah Witnesses, black people. A girl out of the army showed up, and then a Jehovah Witness showed up from Massachusetts. And they had told me that my wife was going to die and I should read her last rites. And this was before she had any problems. So these black people, I know they were hired to help murder my wife. With the 9 other people in the hospital that showed up, they hired a woman that looked just like Mr. Christensen's wife, only it couldn't have been her because she would have been in her 80s and 90s by then, and she still looked exactly like Christensen's wife. And then she sat down next to me and told me I shouldn't sign myself into the hospital my wife was in because they'd kill me there.
Christensen had been your employer in Michigan that built the Georgia
When I was
Guidestones.
18 years old, and this
Yeah.
is 30 years later when I was in my 50s.
Yeah.
It couldn't have been Christensen's wife, but she told me she flew from Michigan to tell me not to sign myself into the hospital. And I know it was an actress who was hired who looked like Christensen's wife.
Well, they had to have hired everybody because for them to scream slatery like that and you know the mess they would have had to made and clean it up, cutting her ears and things like that. I mean, you
Well,
know, they had to have had people hired in there to look the other way.
right, missing her ears. The doctor who made out her death certificate said she died of natural causes with a slit throat Halloween Day, and that's not true. And to
Obviously.
this day, I don't have her ears back. And then when I went to the police station in Greenville and tried to get them to open a murder case, they listened to me for about a week and a half, and then the detective's boss came and he told me I'm not going to file murder charges because it's not my fault the U.S. government is corrupt. So I went to
Wow.
Johnson City where her throat was slit Halloween Day and her ears were taken. And that sheriff told me he just wanted to leave the murder up to God instead of doing his job. And I insisted that with the DA, I drove myself to the DA and I kept insisting to the DA they open a murder case.
Yeah.
And then I went back to Johnson City and that African American sheriff finally opened a murder case and he gave me a detective who's never called me. So they've never tried to solve the murder of Victoria. And 7 years prior to that, when Terry was murdered, Terry had told me that she had seen a black man stalking her from our barn and a white man. And Terry had been kidnapped out of her CPS Head Start office by 2 off-duty policemen. And the policemen in the state where I put her on a Civil War ranch, they were all selling drugs. So I believe the senators and the CIA, whom I stopped in Utica, Michigan in 1979 from selling illegal guns and drugs, they paid me back by murdering my wives. And Terry was murdered on my birthday, July 4th, by people stalking her when she walked her dog. And those people stalking her were probably policemen. And Victoria was murdered right in Johnson City Hospital while a state policeman from Senator Graham's state looked over her. And on the day they murdered Victoria, I had hired an attorney to file murder charges because her ears were gone. And they kept trying to kill Vicky in Johnson City. The last time I talked to Vicky, she woke up and she said, somebody's trying to hurt me. And I told her, yes, I already know. And I had filed police reports in 2 cities, but the police used fake names and badge numbers. So the police helped murder Terry and Victoria. And I don't think this, I know this. This is something I know. And that's why the murders never were solved. And on the very day that Vicky, her throat was slit, that evening, the lawyer I hired to go to the district attorney was murdered. And the local newspaper run by Alex Jones said he had a heart attack, and I don't believe that story. He was healthier than I was. And I've been meeting with him for almost a month, about 30 days, about my wife, Victoria, and what was being done to her by doctors in the hospital she was in. Because
With Alex Jones III, you met him for 30 days?
I live next door to him.
So you were trying to get him to tell the story. I didn't realize that part.
I lived next door to Alex Jones. I lived on Lynn Avenue.
Yeah, I knew you lived next door, but I didn't realize you had tried to.
From a house I rented from the Walters family. I rented that house from the Walters family next door to the Alex Jones of the Greenville Sun.
Okay.
And his top reporter, I talked to him, and his name is Coons, and that's Senator Coons' family.
Oh, wow.
And that's the head reporter at the Greenville Sun. And on the day my lawyer was murdered and Victoria were murdered, I talked to Coons and I told him, I've had 2 wives murdered on the Civil War ranch. And he talked to me about it for almost an hour. But he never published anything in the Greenville Sun.
Unreal.
Instead, they covered me up with Cook and Perry and the Duck Dynasty and never even gave my wives an obituary. And the head reporter working at the Greenville Sun, Mr. Coon, who is Senator Coons' family, he knew the entire story, didn't write anything about it. And on the day Victoria died, they gave Greenville the National Guard like they did there in Kent State when they murdered those four students at Kent State, marking my life as I grew up with Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young in Michigan. And I went to school with Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young. And then my farm where I stopped the illegal gun and drug trade, run by the CIA and Senate, just before the world got Oliver North. That same band that gave you 4 dead in Ohio bought Lionel trains next door to my farm. And these things are not coincidence. Then 9/11 happened. Then they murdered my wife, Terry, and then my wife, Victoria. And then they covered it all up. with Cook and Perry. And Cook, I was partners with him at a ministry called Smoky Mountain Ministries. And as soon as my wife died, he stopped giving me a paycheck, so I couldn't hire a new attorney. I couldn't pay my bills, couldn't do anything.
Mm-hmm.
And Cook is my only living second wife's family. Married to me back when I divorced my first wife, Nancy, when she stabbed me in the back with a butcher knife. 2 years later, I married the Westhouse family. And her family is Cook and Perry. And Cook and Perry, Cook was trying to have sex with me as she married my brother who ran Fort Knox. My
Cook
brother,
and Perry gave us trouble right here in Marietta, Ohio, too, covering up your story. It's unbelievable.
yeah, and yeah, Cook, Perry, and Hall.
Mm-hmm.
And these are
Yeah.
these people kidnapped me, and they all practice witchcraft.
Mm-hmm.
Cook and Perry and Westhouse and her mother and her father, they were all witches. And they didn't tell me they were witches until after I'd been married to her for a year. And when I'm certain they murdered Jimmy Hoffa because they introduced me to Whitey a couple weeks before, and Whitey sold me a car. The car broke down. I had to junk it, and then I went somewhere else and bought another car, and the FBI detained me for Jimmy Hoffa's murder because my wife's mother was with Jimmy Hoffa, and she had absolutely nothing to do with the trucking industry, but her and her daughter had introduced me to Whitey, who sold me a car, which led to the FBI telling me I murdered Hoffa, who's my family, and then Hoffa's my family member. He's married into my mother's family. And I was in his union for one day when that happened. And all these people in my life from the Westhouse family, they murdered Jimmy Hoffa, and I don't think it, I know it.
Mm-hmm.
And this is when Clinton became president a couple years later and then started stealing enriched uranium off of my mother's properties, off of Gardner and Fuller Streets up in Washington state. And then she was selling it in Ukraine. Mm-hmm. And then look at who you got on the day that the Westhouse family murdered Jimmy Hoffa. You got Dustin Hoffman,
right,
from Ukraine.
Yeah.
In the Graduate, as I graduated. And this is
pretty obvious, isn't it?
Yeah, these things aren't coincidence, not coincidence. And then the biggest star back then was Sylvester Stallone, another Ukrainian. So the Clintons, and they dangled Hollywood, which my family built, in front of the Ukrainians.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're helping Ukraine instead of helping our oldest ally, Russia. And Joe Biden is responsible for that.
Yeah, so they're stealing the uranium from Washington State off of Gardner Street and then giving them movies made in Hollywood right there at the Gardner and Fuller streets in Hollywood. It's unreal how this stuff just goes together hand in glove.
They're all Ukrainian.
Mm-hmm.
And then they've never gone to jail for any of this.
Yeah.
It's been in the news all this time. And then, I'm the Gardner family.
Right.
And Ava Gardner married Frank Sinatra and Mickey Rooney. And Gardner and Fuller is my great-great-grandmother. They built Hollywood. And then they were murdered on Clinton Road when their car exploded.
Right.
My mother was on fire, got thrown out of the car into a ditch full of water. She was burned all over her body, but she lived. That's why I'm here.
Yeah.
And then they stole the properties from my mother, who never knew her own. She was 7 when they murdered her mother and her brothers and sisters. So she didn't even know she owned property in Hollywood. Never
Right.
left Michigan. raised by her foster parents until her own father took her back. And so they stole billions of dollars from her. They stole the patents for buses, vans, and milk trucks from her and the Fuller transmission. We made those in Battle Creek. And they stole their properties in California. Then when I was born, they attacked me at birth, murdered my twin, tortured me repeatedly, Osborn, the governor of Michigan's family. And then they stole my business bottom line, Weiner and Associates. Once again, that's Clinton, Weiner and Aberdeen, with Barr and Graham covering all this up. Graham owns all the media in Detroit, the biggest radio station and Channel 4 News. And they covered all this up for 70 years of my life as they murdered kids all around me. Now, the Coons family never even gave Terry or Victoria an obituary in the Greenville Sun run by Alex Jones. And then remember, Alex Jones used my family's chalk drawing or oil painting from Willie Gardner.
Yeah.
And I really knew Willie Gardner. He would come visit me in Warren, Michigan. So did Marie Presley. I would dance with Marie Presley in a club in Warren, Michigan. And I was a publisher at ASCAP BMI New York, as all my friends stole my publishing company and my federal licenses.
And that picture will be in the book by Willie Gardner, chalk drawing there. And it's amazing the airplane, and what looks like World Trade Center.
Yeah, I know.
And then you had the lady, the first woman pilot, Amelia Earhart there, whatever. She supposedly crashed on Gardner Island as well.
Right.
It's unreal how this keeps going round and round.
No, and this is all my family. And this is after they murdered Admiral Byrd and kidnapped me and my twin on the very same day with Camille Sirhan. And all of this is truth. Camille Sirhan married one of my cousins.
Yeah.
They've had kids. They're still married, if they're still alive. I don't even know, because I left Michigan. And he was born on July 4th, just like me. And I would bet that Camille Sirhan thought he was me, because when she missed her mom and dad, I gave her a hug. And women don't forget things like that. And on that day, I was kidnapped by Long, Wallace, Anderson, Andrews, Osborne, and Darrell Hall.
Yeah.
And they tortured and raped me.
Yeah, and killed your twin right there on the first day of kindergarten.
Right. And this was all done on Hoover Street, out of my public school system. That was a public school system on Hoover Street called Hoover Elementary.
Right.
I never
and Hoover being the gay guy that ran the FBI too.
Everybody on that street either helped cut my father's hands off or tortured and raped me and murdered my twin. And that was Hoover Street in Oakland County. And there's even more. I mean, it goes into the Philadelphia experiment and Merchant Marines on the Edmund Fitzgerald. A song Gordon Lightfoot wrote or sang. I don't know if he wrote it. And then where I used to entertain the troops in Chicago, Lori Lightfoot became the governor there.
Right.
And these things are not coincidence.
No, obviously not.
When I was 14, 15 years old, I was going with Bottom Line Band to Great Lakes Naval Base and entertaining the troops coming home from Vietnam.
Right.
And the reason I was doing that is because my older brother hit a landmine, and he was in Great Lakes Naval Hospital. So I'd go there with my band and entertain all the troops coming back.
Mm-hmm.
And then my best friend was, I grew up with the Butler family. And my best friend, he was running the CIA from Great Lakes for 25 years until his wife was murdered. And his wife was murdered not long after mine. And, so was Oscar Tyler Moore, Mary Tyler Moore's family. He found his fiance dead in a dumpster at Graceland on the same day they slit my wife's throat. And all of these things are related.
Yeah.
To my life. So I don't like Senator Cotton and Senator Coons because they helped murder my wife and cover it up. After I
Pretty good reasons.
stopped an illegal CIA and Senate gun and drug trade on my farm purchased from Donald Trump's tax attorney, Mr. Mazar.
Mm-hmm.
And where can we go from here, Greg?
Well, you mentioned Barr, and then Barr was Trump's attorney general, also covering it up.
Barr lived in my neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
After I was kidnapped and tortured and raped, they put me in the Weeblos, Cub Scouts, in a den called the Weeblos. And then my den mother introduced me to Mrs. Barr, who showed me alligators and crocodiles in her basement. And then years later, she fed her own husband to those alligators and crocodiles in her basement. But I can't find any news stories about it.
Yeah, that's
But
pretty wild.
It was mainstream news back when I was a young man. Mm-hmm. And then Mr. Barr, he gave Epstein his job in Manhattan as a school teacher that gave him access to the kids he was selling to the Queen's son in London, and the Clintons, and probably Weiner, and Eastman
definitely.
Kodak, and all these people. And where my wife was murdered, my farm was next door to Eastman Kodak in Tennessee.
Right. Weiner's shown his privates online, that there's obviously a history of perversion there. It would make a lot of sense for him to be connected to Epstein.
All these pedophiles were from Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
And even Stone cut the bone out of my foot as torture on the day Kennedy was murdered.
Right.
And so you got Kodak taking my baby pictures with George Towers in 1953, and then again in 57 when I was kidnapped, when Admiral Byrd was murdered. And then they were taken on September 11th, 1953. And these are not coincidences.
Right.
And then Kennedy was murdered leaving or going to the Trade Mart. That's where he was going, which was the Twin Towers in Texas at that time. And
wow.
They planned 9/11, and I don't think it. I know it.
Oh, I know. And then Kodak partnered with Eastman, and that's Trump's buddy, Eastman.
Yeah, Eastman. And then Graham is Trump's buddy. Stone is Trump's buddy. Osborn works for Trump. Osborn and Stone got Trump put in the White House, and then Trump wouldn't let it go. He tried to steal the White House. And Eastman, Stone, Towers, Osborn, Graham, these are the people that helped kidnap me and covered it up in all news.
Yeah, Osborn is running Trump's campaign, and another Osborn there is running the sex crimes division of the FBI. It's so obvious.
Yeah,
who these people are.
As they murdered kids all around me for 70 years.
They're right there in all the ideal places where they need to be to cover up the pedophilia.
Right, exactly. And then Terry was protecting 2 kids in her Head Start CPS office when 2 off-duty policemen kidnapped her. And they were probably making the porno with a 3-year-old and a 7-year-old, a boy and a girl, on the Great Lakes, where they used to put me on seaplanes and fly me out to California and sell me for sex.
You didn't say who Terry was in this video yet. So someone just watching this one, they won't know.
Terry Heath was my second murdered wife.
Yeah.
She was murdered on my birthday, July 4th. We were supposed to be married the following week. And that was on the Manning Civil War Ranch. Manning co-created the JFK archives. After Stone illegally cut the bone out of my foot, pretending he was a surgeon in a hospital. And
Right.
Stone was supposed to go to jail for 30 years, but somebody let him out of jail early. And then the guy that murdered my wife, Victoria, after murdering Terry on that same Civil War ranch, was let out of jail by a judge named Slater, and his name was Shovel. And they let him out of jail early. And that's why they were running a shovel around her bedroom, because my only living wife, the Westhouse family that murdered Jimmy Hoffa, told me about Shovel when I was 16, 17 years old.
Right.
He was a biker, she knew.
And it may have been the very same guy she was talking about that they let out of prison,
And
possibly.
they've murdered 4 of my wives since I divorced her, but she's still alive.
Right.
And get this, Greg, she's a hospital administrator. And she works as a paralegal secretary in California. Interesting, huh?
Well, yeah.
And then they covered up my wife's dismemberment and murders in hospitals by writing natural causes on the death certificates.
Yeah, they were both killed the second time in hospitals. You revived 2 of them.
Right.
Got them to the hospital.
Flew them to the hospital.
Yeah, flew them. Yeah. And then they were murdered both again in the hospitals.
Right. And I wasn't there when they were.
Right. Yeah. You weren't even there. So it's not like somebody can come back and say you did it.
They murdered the first wife when I left Michigan. Her and I didn't get married because my brother raped her in front of our children. So we went our separate ways. I moved to Tennessee. They murdered her. And then they murdered my next 2 wives. And then when I moved to California, they murdered my first wife, Nancy Lavoie, as they shot Lavoie Finicum. And who did that? The FBI. And that takes you back to Osborn, who's running the sex crime division right now. And
absolutely.
Then Weiner, because he took my trademark after I hired him at the age of 16 in Michigan, he went to New York, married Aberdeen, and then he went to jail for exposing himself to minors online. And
wow,
when he didn't protect my trademark, the 2 lawyers in New York wrote a book, and all the lawyers in California have studied out of my stolen trademark to pass the bar exam. And then I grew up with the Barr family and the Garland family. Trump appoints Barr, knowing that Barr isn't going to help me tell my truth of my murdered wives.
Right.
And then Biden gives you Garland, who isn't going to help me.
Who's the Wizard of Oz? Judy Garland. Right.
Right. So the very people that kidnapped me and murdered my wives, they protected themselves from the White House and the Senate. And all of this is truth.
It's so obvious who the Osborn family is. I mean, Ozzy Osbourne, but then there's also the first gay country singer is Osborn, openly gay.
Yeah.
In music today.
And I could go even further.
Oh, geez, all the Halls. I mean, you got Daryl Hall there was one of the rapists with Osborn.
And then I could talk about the Lambert family, who are all gays, marrying into the Baker family.
The Lamberts I know here are gay. It's unreal.
All over the whole country they are. And
Yeah.
I went to school with the Lambert family.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then on the day they murdered the 5 Duncan kids and the world got arsenic and Old Base in all the public school system on the very same day.
Yeah.
They gave you Duncan McLeod, played by another Lambert.
Yeah, there can only be one, and that's the big battle of the eternal ages.
Right.
Lambert is fighting the battle for homosexuality against
And
everybody
I went
else.
to high school with those people.
Yeah, yeah, they know exactly what they're doing when they make these movies.
No, and then they hid me throughout high school. Nobody ever helped me. L. Brooks Patterson murdered his own family member when I told him his L. Brooks Patterson was outside the house I was tortured and raped in. He confronted his own family member about that, and they hung him in his own belt that night in Oakland County Jail. And I posted that news clipping from 1959 or 1960 or whenever it was.
Wow.
L. Brooks Patterson murdered his own family, his own nephew or his own son. It's just unbelievable. And no news about any of these murders. And Greg, I got 4 wives murdered. My mother's whole family was murdered. That's 5 entire families murdered. I had 5 kids murdered in 2017 as I sat in L. Brooks Patterson's office.
So nobody in this country will tell your truth, but then when you make statements and ask Putin to point you out, he'll go out and sing Blueberry Hill, and he'll kill the journalist Hall, or shoot him. He didn't die. Shoot journalist Hall, in Ukraine.
Russia has always been a United States ally, always.
Mm-hmm.
And Putin is against gays.
Yeah, that's exactly what he said the day before he invaded Ukraine.
He's a straight man, and he told you the gays and the neo-Nazis have taken over Ukraine.
Yeah, and that's what he wanted to stop. That was in his speech.
That's the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And in our country, the gays and the Nazis are taking it over. George Bush was a Nazi. He made Hitler's uniforms and parachutes, ammunitions right in Greenville, Tennessee, next door to the farm where they murdered 2 of my wives throughout World War II.
Yeah, you can't make it any more clear than this.
The entire town made Hitler's parachutes and uniforms.
Anybody doesn't believe that, that's where they kept Hitler's car in a museum there in Greenville, his limousine. And then to make it even crazier, you have Osborn, running for Senate in Pennsylvania, right there where one of your wives is from, Pennsylvania. Well, he went to Greenville and posed in front of Hitler's car. That's Dr. Oz. And Dr. Oz was that one actress who said that's Joan Rivers. He was Joan Rivers' doctor, and Joan Rivers exposed Michelle Obama as a tranny at one point. What people believe about that's one thing, but that's what she said. Yeah. It goes together hand in glove.
And then there's Kenya. Where's Kenya? In Africa?
Yeah.
Oh, and all of Hitler's top brass ran to South Africa. That's where Elon Musk is from.
Mm-hmm. More Nazis, yeah.
That's where all the Nazis ran, Africa.
Right.
Now they're coming back to the United States, and London owns all the media. Do you know who owns CNN now, Greg?
No.
He's from the BBC in London.
Oh, of course, every single news right now. I don't care if it's Fox, OAN, Newsmax. I don't care if it's CNN, ABC, NBC. All of the journalists now just about are British with a strong British accent now. I mean, they have completely taken over the news in this country.
The head CEO at CNN is now from the BBC in London.
Well, I mean, and Fox was already owned by Rupert Murdoch, right? And he's, I think, Scottish or something.
He lives in London.
Yeah.
And he keeps he'll put copyrights on videos you and I make here, and he has nothing to do with it.
Yeah, he has nothing to do with this conversation, but he'll take a conversation video on YouTube like this one and try to pretend like it's his. It's unreal.
Right. Yeah. And there's no telling where he's. I can't even put up a speech from Kennedy without them censoring it all over Europe.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm serious, Greg.
Yeah, the one you posted it the other day on Facebook, and I was listening to it. Yeah.
And Fox and CBS is the Canadian broadcasting system.
Yeah, you're talking about Kennedy's speech to the newspaper publishers,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. They blocked it all over Europe.
Unreal.
It's just unbelievable what's going on in this country. You and I, they told us we're free, but they keep us in this little tiny box, and they never tell the truth in the news. Never. And Canada runs all the news. Now the BBC is running CNN, and CNN, you know, is Anderson and Cooper. Anderson kidnapped me, and Cooper kidnapped my daughter.
Right.
And now London is running that.
It's so obvious, isn't
right
it?
from the BBC.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we're not free, Greg.
No, you can't. You literally can't hear truth.
If I were free, I'd have my patents for buses, vans, milk trucks, the Fuller transmission, and I have my trademark for bottom line. I created the word.
Right.
It wasn't in the dictionary. My public school system was funded by Webster, and Webster put the word in the dictionary as DuPont from France stole it with 2,500 American corporations. After my baby pictures were taken on September 11th, 1953. And then in the Matrix, you have the star.
Mr. Anderson.
Yeah. My birthday is his driver's license.
No, it's 9/11, I think, on there. It says 9/11's his birthday. Mr. Anderson on the Keanu Reeves.
His license, when you do a close-up, it's my birthday.
Okay. I was thinking it was 9/11, but.
And then the black Indian girl, remember, blacks murdered 2 of my wives.
Yeah.
On the Manny Ranch.
Uh-huh.
And I was raised on an Indian reservation after I was kidnapped.
Yes.
When I escaped them. An Indian chief put me on an Indian reservation. You get Gordon Lightfoot singing about the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. The Edmund Fitzgerald, the Merchant Marines, were Cameron and Pratt, my 2 neighbors.
Mm-hmm.
And they cut my father's hands off.
Mm-hmm.
And all of this is interrelated.
And we even found that Indian in the Smithsonian, didn't we? Found a voice recording of him.
Yeah.
That guy that took you in.
And then the Matrix, it's Mr. Anderson. And Mr. Anderson was one of the people who kidnapped and raped me and tortured me.
Mm-hmm. You know, I'm real surprised how many Andersons are the main character in so many TV shows. I mean, I was watching one yesterday, another Superman series on CW. Superman, or Lois Lane's father is Mr. Anderson. I mean, and that's not the only one. I've seen probably a dozen movies and TV shows where Anderson is the main character.
All the people who kidnapped, tortured, and raped me and murdered kids in Oakland County, they're in all the movies.
Yeah.
And I've grown up knowing this. Mm-hmm. But because people like Graham and Throne of London kidnapped me, they're not going to say my truth on the media.
Right.
So I've been saying it to myself all my life and watching it.
Right.
You're the first person that ever listened to me.
Well, they sure make it really obvious on the movies. I mean, Hall and Oates, and you know, yeah, you see Huey on Hall and Oates with wearing a Hall and Oates T-shirt, you know, and his name is Huey, that's the character, and his superpower is to become invisible. I mean, they make it so freaking obvious.
Yeah, I know, and I don't exist in any media. after they murdered my whole family 5 times, including the children. And nobody's gone to jail. And that's because they hired policemen and bikers to murder my family. And they spent millions of dollars of my money to do this. They stole my money and then they spend my money to murder my family.
Yeah.
We'll end it here, Greg. This is the
Okay.
this is the August 30th super full moon. It's not going to be this close to Earth again for 14.
Super moon, and isn't it another blue moon also?
Yeah, and the moon is not going to be this close to Earth again for another 14 years.
Well, that'll make it more magnanimous and the message will spread better.
Do you have anything to say?
Oh man, I mean, there's so many things I'm thinking of, like Mayor Huey of Hughville, and Back to the Future 3. It's just, in your story about the DeLorean, how you knew DeLorean. I mean, there's so many things.
Bob Barker just died.
Yeah.
And Bob Barker delivered me.
Mm-hmm.
That's who delivered me and my twin.
Oh, well, that's in the book too. We talk about Maul Barker and that family.
Yeah.
Yeah, we better stop.
you have a good, yeah, we could go on forever. I can fill libraries with real history.
Yeah.
And now you know it. When I met you, I told you that. You probably thought I was crazy. Bye, Greg.
All right. See you later.